so exciting. Earlier, I got to take everyone inside the historic mission operations control room 2. That's the historic mission control room that was used during the Apollo 11 moon landing mission. The wild thing about that is it wasn't just used for this one historic event. It was used in the Gemini program, which preceded the Apollo program. That's when they were practicing maneuvering in space and docking with other spacecraft so that they would be prepared for these Apollo moon missions. Then it was used in the Apollo era. It was used for Skylab, which was America's first space station there in the 70s. And it was used all the way through the shuttle program, of course, which first launched in 1981 with the Space Shuttle Columbia, which, as we know, of course, ultimately saw its demise in the skies over East Texas in 2003. Though that control room that I was referring to was not used at that time. It went out of operation, regular use in the early 90s during some of those early shuttle missions. But that was an exciting time. That was an amazing experience. So we want you to stay tuned here throughout the next, half hour or so. During the East Texas News at 6 on both KLTV and KTRE, I'm going to take you back inside that historic mission control room and also talk to some of the people who helped restore this. And that's the big thing about this. It had been closed for a couple of years. It had been off the tour here at Space Center Houston because it was kind of falling into disrepair and neglect. It had really never been preserved whenever it stopped being used on a day-to-day basis. So just a couple of years ago in 2013, they decided they wanted to restore this piece of history. It was actually made a national landmark, a national historic landmark back in 1985. And they decided that it needed to be back on the tour. So they raised $5 million. $2 million of that came from private donations. The other $3 million came from the city of Webster. That's right here, suburb of Houston. That's where the Johnson Space Center is located. They saw it as a big draw for tourism, and they also believed in the mission, the educational programs here at Space Center Houston. So the city of Webster put up $3 million and helped restore that historic mission control room. So tonight on the East Texas News at 10, we're going to hear from Gene Kranz. He was the iconic flight director and eventually became the director of operations here for the Johnson Space Center. And if anyone's a big space buff like me, then you know who he is historically. But if you saw the movie Apollo 13, Gene Kranz was the character that was portrayed by Ed Harris. He's the guy who's known for his trademark motto, "Failure is not an option." And so Gene Kranz will be speaking here tonight to a sold-out crowd. We're going to be able to get inside, and we're going to bring you his remarks, his thoughts on 50 years since the first flight of Apollo 11, or the flight of Apollo 11, the historic first moon landing. He's actually going to be coming back on Sunday, and there's going to be sort of a reunion of other flight controllers during that era and some of the Apollo astronauts, some of the surviving Apollo astronauts. And that's going to be really cool for all of them to be back together. He worked all throughout that same era, retired from NASA in the early 90s after 37 years of service. But I'm really excited to hear what he is going to say about this historic moment in human history and his role in all of this. So again, that's going to be in a few hours here. It starts at 7 o'clock. We'll bring it to you on the East Texas News at 10, so be sure to watch here. There is a lot happening. If you're watching at 4 and 5, I talked about just how NASA realizes this is not only cause for celebration because of this unmatched achievement, but this is an important opportunity, hopefully, to inspire the next man to walk on the moon and the first woman. Now, that's supposedly going to happen in 2024. NASA is returning to the moon in 2024. They're going to explore the South Pole for the first time. And NASA says they're going to send another man and the first woman to walk on the moon. And then beyond that, the 2030s and beyond, plans are to actually make the first missions to Mars. And so that is more likely where maybe there's a kid who comes or a young adult who comes this weekend and gets to see history up close. When I was reflecting on all of this, it was so cool because I long wanted to be an astronaut, and decided that wasn't for me when I took AP Calculus in high school. And I have so much respect for the mathematics that's involved in the science, but my second passion was journalism. Anyway, I'm sure that there are so many kids out there who have that same kind of story where they were just fascinated by the science involved, the adventure, the exploration here. And that's what NASA's trying to do, is to plant those seeds in the hearts and minds of young people to get them excited. You know, just a couple of days ago, they actually released a study, a survey that said more kids wanted to be a YouTube star than wanted to be an astronaut. And that kind of struck me. You know, that's where we are today. But we need men and women. We need young people to enter this field to continue to advance science associated with space flight. For, of course, think of all of the medical initiatives, the breakthroughs that have come from the space program and continue to do that. So we need to have a vested interest in America's space program and the success of that. And NASA agrees. That's their whole goal here this weekend, is to inspire, but also to reflect on those incredible men and women who made this happen, who troubleshooted problems. And you're going to hear about one of those that happened at the most critical phase of the Apollo 11 mission that's coming up during my story at 6 o'clock here in about 15 minutes or so on the East Texas News on KLTV and KTRE. So behind me, and I'm going to move the camera here in just a second so that you can see, right behind me is actually a full-size, unflown Saturn V rocket. So it's inside that building in the distance. You can see that if you come here and do the tour at Space Center Houston. The tram tour takes you over there. So the really amazing thing, that's the Saturn V rocket, is the giant, tall stack, the most powerful rocket ever created until that point, is what lifted all of those spacecraft, the command module, service module, the lunar module, all the way into orbit, and then broke free of Earth's gravity into a translunar orbit and got us to the moon. A powerful rocket, just really amazing. So Apollo 11 went to the moon. Apollo 12 went to the moon. Apollo 13 was that successful failure where there was a problem in flight on the way to the moon, and the 3 astronauts made it home safely. Apollo 14, 15, 16, and 17 all made it to the moon and back. There were planned missions beyond that. Apollo 18, 19, and even potentially into the 20s were budgeted. They were in production. This is the only Saturn V rocket in the world where all of those components were actually meant for flight. So if, due to budgetary issues, if those later missions hadn't been cut, that rocket inside that building would have gone into space and would have taken astronauts to the moon. So you can walk inside, you can get up close to it, you can see all of the different components. It's hard to see in the distance, I know, it's inside this building. But to give you a perspective, the Saturn V rocket is laid out there on the ground, on its side, inside that building. When it was standing tall, it was as tall as a 36-story building. So, some of you saw the video earlier in the week of the Saturn V rocket being projected onto the Washington Monument. That was a full-size, the Washington Monument's 555 feet tall. This is a bit shorter, but still 36 stories tall. That's nothing to scoff at.
And that's laying in there right now?
Yes. It's inside, and you can go up to it, take pictures, get really close to it. It's just really amazing that there are a couple of other Saturn V rockets that pieces of it are on display at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, at the Space Center in Huntsville, Alabama. But this is the only one that was actually meant for space flight. All of the components of it were going to fly in space. So there's so much to see. Again, I'm going to tell you all about the Mission Control Room restoration coming up here on the East Texas News at 6. But all weekend, Space Center Houston's just having a Texas-sized celebration, a big party. Tomorrow night, Walk the Moon and Philip Phillips are going to be in concert, and there's going to be kind of a New Year's Eve style countdown to the moment that Neil Armstrong set foot on the moon for the first time, and that happened at 9:56 p.m. our time. So they've got so much happening tomorrow on GMAT weekend at 8 a.m. I'm going to take you inside this big STEM zone where they have all kinds of STEM activities, the science, technology, all of that, engineering, mathematics. And the kids are coming in and they get to try their hand at robotics and learn different concepts and have fun while doing it. So again, this is a big educational opportunity for any of the visitors here at Space Center Houston. There's, again, like I said, a lot of fun. Science is fun, but there's also fun for those non-space nerds like me, and the kids and the big kids too. They're going to have all kinds of food. There's a lunar beer garden. Not entirely certain yet what all that constitutes, but there's really something here for everybody. So let me move the camera here, and I'm going to kind of take you around. I'm going to flip it around, and we're going to walk over here, and I'm going to show you a little closer that Saturn V rocket. So let me flip this around. We're going to head over here. I'm kind of in a central location right now, so I would be able to do my different live shots up against a fence. But let me zoom in here. I may not be able to, but you can see off in the distance. I can hold this up. That's the Saturn V rocket here. You can see off in the distance the tram. Oh, sorry. And back over here is plugging in my mic again. Back over here is the stage. There we go. Back over here is the big stage where Philip Phillips and Walk the Moon will actually be taking the stage tomorrow. Okay, off in the distance, I know it's a little bright right now. That is the shuttle carrier aircraft. It's a Boeing 747, and that was actually used to transport space shuttles. If they landed at Edwards Air Force Base in California, they had to transport it back to the launch site at Kennedy Space Center in Florida, and they transported it on top of a 747 aircraft. There were two of them. Now this here on top of that is not an actual space shuttle, but it is a full-size replica of the space shuttle. It was moved here just a couple of years ago, but they call it Space Shuttle Independence. So again, that didn't actually fly in space. It's not a functional space shuttle, but that's the exact size of a space shuttle, and it's on top of the actual shuttle carrier aircraft. You can go inside both of them, which is really cool, to walk inside that 747 and see how it was retrofitted. They took out all of the seats, and now it's part of the museum, and you can go up on the upper level into the space shuttle replica. It's a high fidelity mock-up, and you can actually get inside the cargo bay and the flight deck, and it's just astonishing how huge this is. But that's there. Off in the distance here, you've got the STEM area where they have those indoor, thankfully, heat index is like 105 here in Houston today. We've got that moisture coming in from the coast, and it's not doing anything but making it unbearable outside. So everything you need, with the exception of this concert, is indoors, either inside Space Center Houston, or it's over here in these tents that are air conditioned. So of course, Space Center Houston is open 7 days a week. If you can't make it down this weekend, you can come back at your leisure. It's well worth it. So if you've ever had any kind of fascination with the space program or not, if you just love science, there's plenty to learn here as well. So All of this kicks off tomorrow at 9 o'clock. They're going to have the Blue Angels parachuting in tomorrow morning, which will be really cool. That's coming up tomorrow morning, and hopefully we'll be able to kind of see that on GMAT weekend at 8 a.m. So that's tomorrow. And then again, all of these STEM activities will take place. They have panels, some lectures with different astronauts. They'll be here. The kids get to meet them. The big kids too will get to interact with former astronauts and really just kind of have the lay of the land here at Johnson Space Center. There's a tram tour that takes you here from the museum area actually onto the campus of Johnson Space Center, and you can go to the Saturn V complex that I was telling you about. Right outside of that is actually a rocket garden, and they have a Mercury Redstone rocket that's upright. If I was able to zoom in, you actually could see the top of it here at the tip of the building.
You can see it just a little bit. We can see it.
Okay, good, good. The camera is better than I thought it was. So yeah, the thing that almost looks like an antenna sticking up out of the top of the building, that's the tip top of the rocket that was used during the Mercury program. Those were the 7 flights, the first flights that took Americans into space for the first time. There's also a test article rocket, a shorter version of what was used in the Apollo program, where they were testing out the capsule and the service module and those different components. It's also upright as well, and there's like an engine that was used in the space shuttle program, and it's taller than, I'm 6'2", and it's like looking up at it, just the engine itself. So really just so much happening here this weekend.